Sean Connery really should have stuck with his never again statement. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today, we're going to be continuing my 007 review series with the second non-Eon produced James Bond film, 1983's Never Say Never Again. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Never Say Never Again stars Sean Connery, Kim Basinger, and Barbara Carrera, and was directed by Irvin Kershner of Star Wars fame. Based on Ian Fleming's 1961 novel Thunderball, it tells the story of an aging James Bond, played by Sean Connery, returning to the role after 12 years, as he's reinstated to his 00 position in order to find stolen nuclear missiles. This is not a great movie. Just as its own thing, it's pretty rough, but when you inevitably compare it to the Eon-produced Bond franchise, it's downright terrible. To be fair though, I don't think this movie really had much of a chance. It was going up against, at that point, 13-movie-long franchise that had its own fan base who expected certain things from a Bond movie. But because this wasn't an Eon Productions film, they legally couldn't include a lot of those expectations. No gun barrel opening, no stylistic title sequence, no Bond music, and no real identity. Right from the outset, this doesn't really feel like a Bond movie. Again, I recognize that's partly due to the legal restrictions placed on it, but still, it's using the same Ian Fleming source material, but manages to have almost none of the Bond essence to it. I think if the film had established its own style, or its own voice and identity, it'd be easier to accept that it's part of a separate Bond universe and was its own thing. But instead, it just feels very vacant. It has certain elements that are clearly referencing and riding on the coattails of the Eon franchise, which gives it an almost parody feel at times. But then the majority of it feels like they took the character of Bond and dropped him into some random movie just to see what would happen. Now, we can't talk about Never Say Never Again without discussing Sean Connery. I think he's both this film's biggest asset and its biggest detriment. If it weren't for his involvement, there's no way this film would have been remotely successful at the box office. I honestly doubt it would have even ever been made if they hadn't been able to get Connery to sign on. Having the original Bond back in the role after 12 years was a huge draw, and definitely got a lot of people to watch the movie who probably otherwise wouldn't have. So Connery's presence sold tickets and got people in the theater, but he also served as a direct link between this film and the main franchise, which meant that no matter how open-minded somebody was going into this film, there was no way that they could completely separate this movie from the Eon films. Having Connery as Bond ensured the inevitable comparisons, which could only be negative for this movie. I gotta say that when watching the movies in order, it really is a bit strange to see Connery take up the mantle of Bond again. He had obviously aged during the 12 years away from Bond, but mostly falls back into the role fairly easily, especially his proclivity for aggressive and questionable sexual exploits. They definitely up his quip quota here, and there's some extra goofiness, perhaps in an attempt to rival the more level humor in the franchise proper at that point. Things like world domination casino video games, shark chases, snakes used as weapons during car chases, Bond in overalls. There's also a lot of tongue-in-cheek concern about Bond's age and health at the beginning of the movie, which is sort of this fun, self-aware acknowledgement that it had been a while since Connery last played Bond. Kind of funny, considering Roger Moore was actually 3 years older than him, but I do think the age was a little more apparent with Connery. You might think that the lack of its own identity would be the worst thing about Never Say Never Again, but unfortunately, there's something even more disappointing about it. The plot. It actually starts off okay in that regard. The cold opening is surprisingly decent, and the whole health clinic sequence is kind of funny, but then Bond ends up in the Bahamas. The first time I saw this movie, I was amazed that we had yet another Caribbean set Bond, but that amazement turned to utter disenchantment about 30 minutes into the movie when I realized that this was Thunderball. Sorta. It doesn't follow the exact same plot, since this is a new adaptation of Fleming's Thunderball novel, but it can really be viewed as a loose remake of the Eon-produced Thunderball film, which just so happens to be my least favorite Bond film in the franchise up to that point. Awesome. As expected, Never Say Never Again features plenty of dull, murky underwater scenes, so if you've been watching this review series, you already know exactly where this Bond film falls for me. I'm glad this one isn't official. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The only pro here is Sean Connery. And like I said before, this is only sort of a pro. There's definitely something a little comforting about having him back. Even though he doesn't really feel like the same Bond, there's still something almost nostalgic about it. Some of the most enjoyable moments in this movie for me are all of the age jabs, which wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for Connery's return. On the con side, the biggest issue is definitely the plot. This is Thunderball 2.0, which, for me at least, means it's torture. You've got all the underwater stuff again, and while it's slightly less murky than Thunderball, it's just as dull and tedious. Plus, on top of that, you've got some weird, creepy stuff going on with two-way mirrors, and it really doesn't add anything to the story that we already had almost 20 years before. The second con is the lack of identity. This movie didn't have to be, and legally couldn't have been, the same type of Bond film that we were used to. So the simple fact that it doesn't feel like Bond isn't the main issue here. It's that it doesn't forge its own style. It sort of comes across as part knockoff, part parody of the main franchise, but mostly it's just empty feeling, without any sense of self. I'm gonna give Never Say Never Again 2 out of 5 paws, and that's pretty generous for this movie. Sean Connery and the Bond source material are really all this one has going for it, and it's really hampered by the fact that it's essentially a remake of 1965's Thunderball. I would recommend Never Say Never Again really only to big Sean Connery fans. If he's your one and only Bond and you've been dying to see him in the role again, then you'll probably enjoy this one because of his presence. Likewise, if Thunderball was your Bond film, then you might enjoy this one for the story because it's basically Thunderball 2.0. Other than that, though, there's really no need to watch this, even if you're working your way through the main franchise. If you liked Never Say Never Again, the most obvious recommendation would be Thunderball, the 4th film in the Eon-produced Bond franchise. Not only does it star Sean Connery as Bond, but it's pretty much the same story, utilizing the same Fleming source material. If you want another Bond film from the same year that actually feels like a Bond movie, you should check out Octopussy. It's the Roger Moore-led 13th film from the main franchise, and while the story's quite different, it has a much more traditional James Bond feel to it. And if you like the idea of a spy franchise film that doesn't feel like it's related movies, you might want to check out The Bourne Legacy. It's the only movie without Jason Bourne, so it feels kinda strange. Like Never Say Never Again, I think if there wasn't a direct connection to the existing franchise and the film had just been its own standalone thing, it would have been better. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Never Say Never Again? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie featuring an aging spy? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insider information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.